California Governor Gavin Newsom very clearly intends to run for the Democratic ticket in 2028. He wants to be president, and honestly, he hasn't really been trying to hide it. And as I think about what he will likely run on, it's very likely that he is going to point to his signature homeless housing policy as what will be a national model for solving the very real problem of homelessness in the United States. And if anyone is enticed by his campaigning on that, you should know that that signature policy, known as Project Homekey, has been riddled with fraud, scathing audits, and at this point, 2 criminal federal indictments. So the piece that I published is titled Newsom's National Model for Homeless, Racked by Fraud. It's published for Real Clear Investigations. There's original reporting in there. This is actual journalism. It's not just me commenting. In fact, I'm not allowed to share my opinion at all. And so this is work that really fulfills me, even though it's really hard to do original reporting. I now understand for the first time in my life why it takes journalists sometimes months to work on a story and publish a story. But with that in mind, I want to share the details of what I've learned and why we need to hold members of our own party accountable when they're engaged in wrongdoing, when they're engaged in policies that actually end up stealing money from taxpayers while simultaneously making the problem that they're supposedly trying to fix a lot worse. So Project Homekey began under the name Project Roomkey at the start of the COVID pandemic. And at the start of the COVID pandemic, it made a lot of sense because the idea was we have a massive homeless population in California. Many of them are living in tightly packed shelters or tent encampments. And we're dealing with a highly contagious virus. We're telling our citizens to shelter in place. We need to do something to protect people who don't have homes. And so what they started to do, the state started to use federal money that was provided through FEMA to rent out hotel and motel rooms on behalf of homeless people so they can shelter in place and not be in these tightly packed areas, right? Whether it be the shelters or the tent encampments. And I will be completely honest, I was 100% in favor of this. I thought it was wrong to just pretend like these people don't matter. We should find shelter for them. And that's what they did. Now, it was a very costly program. I don't want to lie about that, but many, including myself at the time, saw the program as worth it. So just to give you an example, in San Francisco, rooms were rented at $6,000 a month, which is nearly double the average cost of a 1-bedroom apartment, at least at that time. So a few months into the program, Newsom decided that it would actually make a lot more sense to pivot from a temporary housing program to a permanent housing program. It would be part of this, housing first, permanent supportive housing policy that Democrats have really been championing in liberal parts of this country. Now, to do so, the state would provide grants to local governments like San Francisco or Los Angeles or Oakland, you get the picture, where they would take the grants and use the money to purchase excess hotel and motel buildings. Sounds like a good idea. And then what they would do, because there are state and federal laws mandating that they have to convert these units to provide kitchens and things like that. What they would do is they would then use grants in order to hire developers who would then convert these units into apartments for the homeless. Now, I remember talking about this on the show a long time ago, probably at the start of this program. It was when Karen Bass had mentioned that the state was doing this, and I thought it was a good idea. And obviously, the whole selling point was that this was going to be a more affordable way of increasing housing for the homeless because we're talking about buildings that have already been built. New construction is a lot more expensive. But if you take the buildings that already exist and just convert them so they abide by state and federal laws and regulations, that's going to be cheaper. So let's do it that way. And I love that idea. I thought that was a great idea. But unfortunately, due to lack of oversight and due to the fact that this was really about a public-private partnership, a lot of fraud took place, and it's even led to criminal indictments. So On top of that, by the way, Project Homekey, which advertises itself as this effort at permanent supportive housing, supportive meaning it would provide mental health services to people in these units, did not actually allocate funding for the mental health programs. It was up to local governments to pay for that and to facilitate it in the way that they see fit. So when we talk about how much money has been spent on this program, so far there's been over, I believe it's close to $4 billion because more money has been spent or more grants have been given out since I published this piece, if you can believe it. But we're talking about around $4 billion spent. And during that time, homelessness has actually gone up. And when you think about the fact that mental illness or drug addiction is very prevalent among the homeless population, it is an issue that Project Homekey pretends like it provides permanent supportive housing, when in reality, up until now, they hadn't been funding the mental health care component of it. And that's a big problem. And that's a heavy lift for these local governments like LA, for instance. So just to give you some of the numbers, a 2023 UC San Francisco study found that 66% of California's homeless population suffers from mental illness. 12% reported experiencing hallucinations, and 31% reported regular use of methamphetamines, and 11% non-prescribed opioids. 16% reported heavy episodic drinking. So these are people who need a lot more than just a place to stay. They need additional services, and those additional services were not paid for through the Project Homekey program up until now. And I'll explain what changed recently. So what's really heartbreaking about this story as well is that some of the people who were struggling with addiction, who were placed in these apartments or these hotel rooms at the start of this program under Project Homekey, they ended up overdosing, and there was no one there with them to, administer Narcan. And so I talked to some homeless service providers, one of them a former homeless service provider from Oakland, who said that this was a really big problem and hasn't really been addressed appropriately. In fact, drug overdose was the cause of death in 7 out of 8 cases at the Airtel Plaza Hotel in Van Nuys in just 1 year, from April 2020 through June of 2021. And then a former homeless service provider from Oakland who I spoke to said this. I thought this quote was telling. Think about how stupid it is to place an addict in a room alone where no one can administer Narcan. So these flaws existed within the Project Homekey program from the very beginning, and no one has really cared about fixing it, right? Because you can have a really good idea, but you're gonna run into issues and you have to recalibrate. The problem was, according to audits that were done on this program, there was no effort to recalibrate. In fact, there's been no tracking of whether or not these programs work to begin with. So Project Homekey, again, has cost the state more than $3.75 billion. So that's the exact figure. And in the 5 years that this program has been in place, homelessness has only gotten worse, which is a pretty clear sign that it's not working. So it's been in place since 2020. Homelessness in California has skyrocketed in the 5 years Homekey has been in place, growing by more than 20%, according to the Public Policy Institute of California. That's an increase of some 36,000 people between 2019 and 2024. And again, no one has bothered to track whether the program is working, whether people placed in housing saw their lives improve, or if they return to the streets. The program's effectiveness is unclear, according to a critical 2024 state auditor's report. Now, let's focus on the city of Los Angeles a little bit, because I do think it's important to see that a lot of the money is also being wasted by overpaying for the very buildings that are being purchased. So in the city of LA, the Housing Authority used $48.9 million in Homekey money to acquire and complete a building that was under construction. Developer Haroni Investments was chosen to construct a 75,105 square foot building with 127 units. But if you do a comparative analysis, a similar project in the area would typically cost roughly $18.8 million, according to experts who spoke to local reporters. HACLAs, and that's basically the government agency that gives the grants. purchase price of $48.9 million represents a 165% profit at taxpayer expense. That's insane. That's just theft of taxpayer money. 71% of the units under the Project Homekey program in Los Angeles remain vacant because they're still unfinished, mostly. That's the main reason. But local government officials keep doing these ribbon cutting ceremonies where they pretend as though the units are ready to go. They completed the project, but the projects aren't completed. In August, city officials held a ribbon cutting ceremony, even though the building that I just talked about, that they really paid a premium for, was not yet finished as of December, meaning as of this month. The LA Housing Department's website says the building is not yet built and there are no listings available for units in the building. Homeless service provider Weingart Center Association used $27.3 million in Homekey grants to purchase a 76-unit senior living complex in LA, which it planned to convert into housing units with additional funding from the city. But federal prosecutors say that the deal was super shady and shrouded in secrecy. In fact, contracts related to the escrow of the building make that clear. So Stephen Taylor, the real estate developer who sold the property to Weingart Center, used fake bank statements to obtain loans and credit to buy the property for just $11.2 million. And that was months before he flipped it to the city for $16.1 million. Okay, and he didn't do anything to the building. There were no improvements, no renovations to the building. A contract clause ensured that his involvement would be kept secret. You want to know why? Because if the public knew about his involvement, they would see that he purchased the property for $11.2 million and then immediately flipped it at a markup at $16.1 million. By the way, Taylor is now facing federal criminal charges because of this. And then there's the other case involving Cody Holmes, the former CFO of developer Shangri-La Industries, allegedly falsified bank records to obtain $26 million in Homekey funds, only to siphon off more than $2 million to pay his own credit card bill. Now, was he facing criminal charges here in California? No, he wasn't. There was a civil lawsuit against Shangri-La, but why wasn't there a criminal case against him? That's what I want to know. Why did it take the feds getting involved to do this? Overall, HCD, that's the housing agency in Los Angeles, or California, I should say, awarded the Shangri-La a total of $117 million in grants for 7 housing projects. The only 2 projects that Shangri-La managed to complete amount to 174 homeless housing units, costing the state $672,000 a pop. The 5 that they never completed went into foreclosure because they were just using the money to pay off credit cards, apparently. So you might be wondering, okay, there's a lack of oversight. Maybe the state legislature should do something about that. And to be sure, they did. They voted unanimously on a bill that would enhance oversight of the Project Homekey program. And guess what? Gavin Newsom vetoed it. He said that the oversight would be redundant. It can't be redundant if there's no oversight to begin with. So when I say that Gavin Newsom is a target-rich environment, this is what I'm talking about. And if you want to beat the Republicans, if that's what you care about the most in the next election, be very careful about who you vote for.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.